All right, hello and welcome to Truck Safety Coalition's Lunch and Learn with Jenny True Reed. First of all, I apologize for the technical difficulties. It's not always the easiest for us to go ahead and get these events going, so I do sincerely apologize for anyone who has been waiting. But let me tell you about our remarkable guest. We are privileged to be joined by Jenny True Reed. She has an incredible background. Just a snippet. The majority of her career has involved criminal prosecution. For 15 years, she served as an assistant county attorney with the Fayette County Attorney's Office. During that time, she focused on the prosecution of misdemeanor offenses, including impaired driving cases, misdemeanor assaults, juvenile crimes. She also had the privilege to serve as the Special Assistant United States Attorney as the result of a cooperative agreement with the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Kentucky, the Fayette County Attorney's Office. While in this position, she focused on the vertical prosecution of crimes under the Project Safe Neighborhood Initiative. Ms. Reed is a 1995 graduate of the University of Kentucky and a 1998 graduate of the University of Kentucky College of Law. She is now a traffic safety resource prosecutor through the Kentucky Unified Prosecutorial System. Welcome to our humble program, Jenny.
Thank you, Zach, for inviting me. It's an honor.
It is our privilege again to have you. For folks following on live, again, sorry for the late start, but feel free to drop your questions into the comments. We'll be posting some resources in there as well that Jenny has shared with us, so that'd be a great place to kind of continue the conversation, and we'll look to bring forth as many of your questions as we can. To start, I think the question that's on everyone's minds is, what exactly is a traffic safety resource prosecutor, and what do they do?
So a traffic safety resource prosecutor, or TSRPs, really facilitate information sharing and conversations with regard to traffic safety. So in my role, for instance, one day I can be working, discussing potential legislation to talk about vehicular homicides or impaired driving cases, or be writing a manual for prosecuting certain types of traffic-related cases, doing legal research for a prosecutor, or conducting trainings. We do a lot of trainings for prosecutors and law enforcement, or members of, for instance, I'm a member of a CDL committee, a state CDL committee, trying to create effective prosecution of those cases. So every day is something different. It's a little bit of everything related to traffic safety.
That sounds like quite the scope of responsibilities. I'm sure a day is never boring from one day to the next. But you've been in this role for a little over a year. I guess, what has surprised you the most?
The extent of the job responsibilities. We work with other traffic safety resource prosecutors. Each state has at least one, sometimes two. So we share information with them, some maybe trends that we see in defense attorneys using, or issues arising. But then we'll talk about, I'll be, conducting legal research, or doing a training all over the state of Kentucky, or attending trainings, learning about different ways that something like marijuana is ingested, THC. So just the scope of it. I prosecuted in Lexington, Kentucky. I prosecuted DUIs for 15 years. And then I had taught law enforcement officers in Kentucky, the laws and case law regarded to driving under the influence. But I never had imagined the scope of traffic related things. It's not just DUI. It's not just CDL. It's just a lot of hats to wear.
I think it's something that most people don't really think much about. So it's a very specialized area that has a lot of complexity to it. What led you to this line of work, if you will? What's the passion that brought you to this place?
So when I went to law school, I wanted to be able to help people. And being a prosecutor was, to me, just one of the best ways to be able to help people, victims, families of victims. Even sometimes the defendants, you're able to help them. So in the career that I had, when we went to a jury trial, it was usually an impaired driving case or a domestic violence assault. And so I really just developed a passion for that. And I always kept it with me, even when I left that job. It was just something I was always interested in. And I always felt like it was a way that I could help people. Fortunately, I've had a family member, someone that's been a victim of a crash with regard to a commercial motor vehicle or impaired driver. But last October, one of my former students, who is also a drug recognition expert for Kentucky, he was on patrol in London, Kentucky, just doing his job, and was killed by a drunk driver. So it's become even more personal for me after that.
Well, of course, my word. But that's something I guess I should say we can understand. I mean, Truck Safety Coalition, we are, as you know, a group of folks, not myself personally, but all of our board or volunteers or people who have been impacted personally, whether they survived a crash or lost loved ones. And they've all had obviously an incredible journey following, that fateful day. And many of them, I would assume, wish they knew that a TSRP had existed. So what resources does the National Traffic Law Center and or a traffic safety resource prosecutor have, that might be of interest to someone following a crash that's impacted them?
So I believe you're all putting a link in the chat to the National Traffic Law Center. That's a great organization. It supports prosecutors. But on that page, there will be a box that will have, I can't remember if it's national list or just a listing of the TSRPs throughout the country. And I would suggest that you click on that and find the TSRP for your state. And then if you find yourself in this situation, or for those that you're advising who are in this situation, I would contact that person as soon as possible for a couple of reasons. The prosecutor handling the case or the law enforcement officers investigating it, depending on their knowledge and background, may not know a lot about CDL statutes and how to prosecute those cases. So a TSRP could come alongside, educate them, provide them resources, connect them with other groups, kind of like our CDL Advisory Committee in Kentucky or the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, or other groups. If the person driving the truck was impaired, connect the victims with MAD and let them walk aside them in the process. But in some states, the prosecutor, the TSRP, can actually try the case or be in charge of the case and through negotiations, etc. In Kentucky, it's not that way. I don't have prosecutorial immunity, which is very important to have if you don't want to be sued. But other states throughout the country do have that. So maybe he or she could even take on the case if the elected prosecutor is willing.
Yeah, and I would imagine. So do you know offhand what, and this doesn't have to be comprehensive, but what are some states that might have that permission, if you will?
I believe North Carolina does. Oregon. Maybe Idaho. I'm not quite sure. Just throughout the country.
Well, it's helpful to be aware of.
But it's worth sending an email and finding out.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. If you can get it to me later, or the comments, I should say. That's a helpful bit of information to be aware of. Sounds pretty incredible. How soon after a crash would you recommend a TSRP be contacted by a victim's family?
As soon as possible, within a week or a couple of weeks, just because they can assist with educating. You might have You might have a law enforcement agency that's well versed in CDL law, but you might not. So it's always good to have somebody that can connect them to resources, and help them through the investigation, and then help the prosecutor if he or she doesn't have a lot of experience in this area.
Okay. And we'll circle back to that, but just briefly, because, some folks might, hopefully they haven't had to learn this finer point, but could you just share briefly, we're talking about prosecutors and district attorneys. What is the distinction between a criminal case and a civil case, as folks seek to kind of get some sense of justice and accountability? And if, for example, if in your response, like if you have retained a lawyer to try to help you, what's their role in trying to support something that the district attorney might be trying to do? Can you just walk us through that?
So just going back to basics, civil law or a civil case is where the victim has hired an attorney to represent his or her interest. They are seeking usually money damages, so maybe lost wages, pain and suffering. It is a case brought by a private citizen against another private citizen or a corporation for some wrong that they have suffered. And you hire your own attorney. A criminal case is a case that is seen as a wrong done to society. So in Kentucky, we have Commonwealth attorneys because we are a Commonwealth, and they represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So they will certainly want a victim's input in the decisions that they make with regard to the criminal case, but ultimately they will make a decision that they think is the best way to handle the case. When it's a criminal case, you're looking at the defendants looking at jail time, prison time, probation, those types of things, as opposed to just monetary damages. They can, in some states, obtain restitution, but that's really not the main goal. Sure. If you do have a civil attorney, your civil attorney should absolutely be sharing information with the criminal attorney, with the prosecutor, and vice versa, because there's some things that they both do need to know and be on the same page. But ultimately, the civil attorney doesn't really have any control over what the prosecutor does, and vice versa. There is, in some states, in Kentucky, we have something called Marsy's Law, which is a hybrid, really, of the two. It is a civil attorney, so an attorney the victim's hires that represents his or her interest in the criminal court. So if they think the case is being delayed, they can file motions, unnecessarily delayed. They're allowed to be in the courtroom during every process of the case, unless there's a grand jury hearing going on. But they represent the interest of the victim. Sure. So in that case, you would have a special attorney that you've hired to represent your interest in the criminal case, because the prosecutor is going to represent the state's interests.
Yeah, it's so hard on victims. As you walk into this, one could make the case a district attorney should have some level of knowledge of commercial motor vehicle law and commercial driver's licenses kind of requirements and regulations, as well as state law as it pertains to commercial motor vehicles. But obviously most all victims, I would imagine, have no idea and get thrown into this world. And we frequently share, although we're not going to try to push anyone to any particular person or firm, that it's incredibly complex, and you need someone who knows what they're doing to help you. And it sounds like, I just had this thought as you were sharing, it's so complex that I know commercial motor vehicle law is not the only interest area of a TSRP, but district attorneys have a resource that knows the ins and outs of all this to help them keep everything straight and know what their options are as they consider potential criminal prosecution options available to them following a crash that, perhaps was highly preventable, and there was some criminal negligence or wrongdoing or culpability involved with the carrier and or the drivers. So I think it just speaks volumes to the fact that this resource exists to help DAs. And what we frequently find with our victim community is that in their view, and this is, I would say 90% of folks, as they've worked with their local district attorney's office, they didn't think that they were very strong in this area, if you will, in knowing the federal standards and the state standards and wanting to really seek accountability for what went wrong. There's often maybe a sentiment, well, this person didn't want to kill someone today, so we shouldn't, they don't want to do that, so we shouldn't be too harsh on them. Again, this is testimonies from our victims. I have not been through that firsthand. Do you find, in your view, as you've interacted with it, I'm sure a number of different folks, do you think that's a fair representation, that oftentimes the kind of knowledge level is low in this area relative to other things for a local district attorney's office?
I think yes, for a lot of reasons. Not really the fault of the prosecutor, but that is why the TSRPs, one of the reasons that we are in place to help and come alongside them. It's kind of a weird situation for a local prosecutor, because you have these federal regulations. They're used to prosecuting state law. Now, those federal regulations have been adapted into state law. But, if you've got 300 traffic cases on your docket, and all you have is a citation and it just said violation of code, blah, blah, blah. Now, this isn't in a collision situation, but it's making that record. If the prosecutor's not educated about it, they're just going to move on to the next case. And then the other thing is, a lot of these serious violations that we see on the state side, those are things that people can go to traffic school for.
Yep.
They get it wiped off their record. And there's a lot of confusion around sending these people to diversion or state traffic school, thinking that it's just the same as if it's somebody like me out on the road, where this is a professional driver with a specialized license. They're held to a higher standard. But there's a lot of confusion and misinformation around.
Well, let's get to that. I'll circle back to another question, but I think that's a natural segue. Okay, good. Yeah, a natural segue here. So to your point, these are professional drivers performing a safety-sensitive function. So with that in mind, I hear a lot of folks talking about this idea of CDL masking, and I think you've alluded to it a little bit. Can you share kind of what this is and kind of a bit about the knowledge gap, and what can victims, TSRPs, other folks, I guess, in the larger community of stakeholders do to help make sure this isn't perpetuated?
So just even before masking, a CDL driver is only supposed to have one CDL license, so infractions can be tracked. There is a problem throughout the country with CDL drivers having multiple CDL licenses, and there are programs in place trying to cut down on that. With that being said, masking is a term trying to cover up what the real charge is. So it could be a deferred prosecution. So a prosecutor may say, Mr. CDL driver, if you don't get another ticket in 6 months, I'm going to dismiss this one. Or I'm going to send you to traffic school. Or you're going to do community service and it's going to be wiped off your record. And those are all things that if somebody like me were speeding or not stopping at a stop sign, those would all be legitimate ways to handle that case. But when it comes down to a CDL holder, it isn't. Those things should never be happening. Unless there is not probable cause for the charge, those charges should never be dismissed, and they should be prosecuted the way that they are written. So there is, a big push with the National Traffic Law Center, with TSRPs, to educate prosecutors that you cannot be masking them. In Kentucky, it's a crime for a prosecutor to mask a charge.
One driver, one record. So if someone may not be aware, a prosecutor, I don't know if a judge has a role in this as well, and someone is going to recommend that as a course of action, and it's going to happen, I guess. What can a victim who knows better say or do in that situation? And let me just take a moment to be clear that there's the individual problem, right? This person didn't follow a regulation that resulted in pain and suffering to me and my family. So on an individual level, obviously this matters. On a systemic level, if we cannot track the safety record of drivers, it's a serious problem for folks continuing to drive, perhaps for different companies who shouldn't maybe be doing this anymore, or at least be suspended for a good portion of time before they're even allowed to sniff the cab ever again. So it's a systemic threat to safety as well. So let's just go back, say this is about to be happening to you, a truck crash victim or survivor, and you know better. What can you do to try to stop this from happening?
So there's a couple of things. I would definitely contact my TSRP. On that National Traffic Law Center, there are CDL resources which contain like a chart for what the CDL laws, statutes are in your state. There is what we call a bench card that judges can use just to scan down and look and see what the laws are and the penalties for the different infractions. So those might be things that I send to my prosecutor, to educate him or her. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that with your prosecutor, and that's completely understandable, or if you can't reach them because they're so busy, I would contact the TSRP and say, I'm really concerned about this happening. Would you mind making a phone call and just kind of being that liaison for me, and talk to them about what they're about to do and whether or not it's really something that they should be doing.
Now, you said it's against the law in Kentucky, and I'm assuming folks prosecutors knowingly try to break this law. It's probably an ignorance of the fact that it's on the books and the problem to safety that it presents if you don't follow it. What happens to a prosecutor? Again, we'll just use Kentucky as an example where this law exists. If they do unknowingly or knowingly participate in CDL masking?
So I can't remember the penalty for Kentucky off the top of my head.
Sure.
And you've got to have someone choosing to prosecute it.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to say it could be 6 months in jail, but I could totally be wrong. So I shouldn't really say anything. I don't.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot. If you had
to guess, it's okay.
That's fine. How many states have a comparable law that this is illegal to do?
I'm not sure about that either. But what I can tell you is that if there is masking throughout the state and it's consistently high and nothing's being done about it, then federal funds can be taken. Highway funds will be taken from the state. So those, are things for roadways, bridges, infrastructure. So if your state has a huge masking problem, then federal government's going to come in and you could see a loss of federal funds. And it starts out at a lower percentage, but if that continues each year, then the percentage increases.
That makes sense. I know we're coming up on time. We got a late start and you're a busy person. I want to loop back. So masking aside, let's say that's not going on, but a victim is concerned that a prosecutor is not choosing to prosecute or recommending a strong enough punitive measure as a result of what's been found. what can they do in that situation to try to get that prosecutor to change their mind?
So the first thing I would do is schedule a meeting with that prosecutor, talk to the prosecutor and share your concerns. If that doesn't happen and the prosecutor is not the elected official or the person in charge, then I would go up the chain of command. If that doesn't work, you can contact your TSRP, but the TSRP is support.
Yeah.
We really can't tell people what to do or change their minds. Social media is media in general. Just it's kind of a hard balance for me to take, but there are ways to get the word out. Your Kentucky Attorney General's office, they might have a provision where you can contact them if you think something's going on. There are a lot, as a former prosecutor, a lot goes into making that decision. Yeah. So I'm not saying that prosecutors are just, I don't care, this is not a big deal, or I don't care about you. That is not the case at all. If they didn't care, they wouldn't be in that role. So right. That's why I would take the first step in meeting with him or her and seeing why they came to the decision that they're coming to, and then make sure that they understand the rules with regard to CDL licenses as well, and go from there.
No, and so, and I think as a former prosecutor, you obviously have a very unique and powerful vantage point. We don't have a lot of these stories, but we've got some where families said, enough, and we're not going to take this. We're going to write letters to the editor in our local paper. We're going to get community signatures. We're maybe, I don't know if they march on the court, but they've done different things to build up community pressure to try to shift public opinion a little bit as they kind of go up the chain to the elected official here. As a former prosecutor, I'm not saying you're recommending someone do these things, but are they compelling?
They are. They are, especially if you have an elected official that's making that decision. They can be, and they'll cause you at the very least to go back and look at your case and make sure you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, and that you're confident in the decision that you made. Once again, this might be a situation where you get an attorney under Marsy's Law, if you have that in your state too, to advocate for you.
Yeah, and obviously there's always the civil course if you tried your best and you can't get the criminal course of action that you wanted. Not that they can do the same things, but there's another bite at that apple in the civil process. Janita, could you share, do we have any questions in the chat so far? Okay. Oh, looks like you mind if I boot you out of the call? Let's see here. We love Janita, but I think I'm going to remove her from the room. What do you wish we asked so that more people are aware of an issue you care about as it pertains to, commercial motor vehicle kind of safety and prosecution and, CDL masking? Was there something we didn't have a chance to talk about that you really wanted to be able to share with your time with us today?
Not really. Just a concern of mine. And you and I have been talking with a wonderful lady that has a lot of goals that she wants to achieve in honor of her son that was killed by a CDL driver. But I think some of the laws, especially with regard to serious offenses and people still being able to drive on the road with some of their history, poor driving history, is concerning. And I would like to see those laws changed. They're federal laws, and I understand trying to balance, especially in COVID and post-COVID, the supply chain and all of that, and wanting drivers and needing drivers, but we need to have safe drivers. Yeah. And so I do have a lot of concerns about the laws and the consequences. I don't think some of them are strong enough. And I think people still get to drive with really poor records. And that's concerning to me, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, hey, you heard it here first. Yeah, that was
but
personal hat on, personal hat. Jenny True Reed's personal opinion. We're not gonna do it. Hopefully you don't get hot water for that, but clearly we agree and we're biased and we're not suggesting that, you know, all truck drivers are bad or don't want to follow
of course
rules.
not.
We're not saying that at all. They've got a hard job. At the same time, it's a safety sensitive job that have federal and state standards to try to help mitigate the risk to others. And there's literally hundreds of millions of other drivers on the road next to an 80,000 perhaps plus pound truck, depending on where you are. It's going to cause a lot of damage, period, the end. And we need folks who are committed to performing that job with safety as a priority for everyone's benefit. And look, that trauma is shared. That trauma it hits the family, hits that driver, hits the folks who come on site, you know, performing emergency response services, law enforcement who might be there. A lot of people are affected, and we don't want folks to have to go through that. So I'm with you, and I'm glad to hear you share that. I don't think we have any other questions in the chat, probably because we got a late start and folks had to move on with their day, but Jenny was very, again, generous with us. You are a delightful soul, Jenny. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Zach, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care.
You too.